Good morning, everybody, to this wonderful Tuesday, the 28th of January. I'll just see if the stream starts. It does. Very good. That I can hear. Good. All right. Once again, good morning, everybody. I hope y'all are good. Despite, everything being everything. Let's do the usual things like, go through emails, go through messages and stuff in the first sprint, read news, maybe if I feel incredibly desperate, and then try to do some actual prose writing in the second sprint. And between those, I'll just, ramble on for, minutes and minutes and minutes and see if I can come up with a coherent sentence here or there. So yeah, not much new to say. I did not record my video for Death of the Author last night. I was too tired. Maybe I'll manage to do it today. That would be, the goal. Hey Ori, how are you doing? I am I'm now reading The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi, and I'm not quite sure what to think of the book. It is certainly entertaining, but it's also not, how to say that. It reads very, very modern, which is good, but also bad because it up to now, and I don't know, 5 chapters in, 6 chapters in, something like that. And that it lacks character, I think, or like any form of like something that makes it stand out. It reads just like any other slightly quirky, slightly sassy modern fantasy writer, and I'm like, okay, that's that's all right. Just not much more. And I'm not quite sure how well the two main themes will fit together. Like this being set for now somewhere in the Indian Ocean with a somewhat Eastern background. Obviously, no, it's in somewhere in Arabia. Then I'm going to Aden and everything. Like how that fits in with the we're doing feminism in our narrative. Like both are obviously really good ideas. The question is like how do those two work together if you basically use a mallet for a writing tool? Because subtle, this is not. And yeah, I mean, it'll be entertaining. So there's that. No, I mean, I don't think you can mismatch tone and setting. That's not necessarily the point. I just feel that a lot of the novels, more modern fantasy and sci-fi authors all use the same tone, no matter what they're writing, no matter whether it's epic fantasy or urban fantasy or science fiction or anything. It's that sort of like super snappy dialogue that is sort of like Joss Whedon influenced in a lot of ways, and having all these snarky characters and this snarky undertone. I think it's setting independent tone that would bore that I find somewhat exhausting at this point because so many people have done it. I'm like, yeah, this is not standing out in any way. And does that mean it has to do like ultra old schooly, oldie timey kind of pseudo historical language? No, absolutely not. It's just it has nothing to set it apart, and I think that's the point in a way. And it's not a contrast to the setting. It would annoy me no matter the setting, right? I guess is my point. And because it is, so focused on having the main character, like it's a first-person narrative most of the time, right? And having that first-person narrator, the main character, come across as uber competent and uber snarky and all of that, and that's why what I mean by lacking subtlety when it comes to telling a story about female empowerment, motherhood, the power and role of like older women, all of these like feminist topics, and putting them into a world that is also very exhaustingly Muslim. Getting both things right, which is a good thing, but getting both things right and work out and not sort of fall into the sort of white feminist being anti-Muslim for all kinds of reason trap, I think, is something that will be difficult to pull off throughout the novel after a while. And so far, I don't have a lot of confidence in Shannon Chakraborty to actually pull that off in a good way. But I guess as long as you have your main characters just like on pirate ships, I guess it'll be fine, because you can basically just use the setting sort of like as a backdrop, and not actually think much about like the actual consequences of 12th century Arabia and all of these places in a lot of ways. I think that's how I would describe it. The modernity of the tone is not so much the problem as the uniformity of the tone with all other, well, not all other, but a lot of other sort of like novels being written these days in or by younger authors, or like authors that have clearly been socialized by like 1990s media in a lot of ways. And I think that's sort of like the problem. I mean, it has sort of like a similar sort of tone in a lot of ways as, say, Scott Lynch's Gentlemen Bastards does. Obviously, it shifts because this is a first-person narrator, but it has that same sort of level of super snarkiness and all of that in there. I guess you could even lump in fucking what's his name, Jim Butcher, and there's more, of course. I'm sure I can come up with more authors where that works or doesn't work, and I feel mostly it just becomes a standardized language, and I'm never a fan of like standardized language, I guess. But yeah, it's not the historical setting that's the problem. It's just the tone. And yeah, I mean, we will see. It certainly moves very fast so far. It does have a lot of like a lot of it feels slightly tropey so far, right? You have the call to adventure. You have to bring the band together, and she's running around and finding her old crewmates, and everyone has a bit of a grudge or some other issue, and is slightly quirky, and then they're going to form their band, and then they're going to do the adventure thing, and it reads a bit like a movie script in that regard. And I don't know if that was like the goal to make this optionable for a TV show or movie or something, or whether that's just like, once again, because certain forms of movie and TV and so forth have been like a massive sort of like influence on a lot of writers these days, and have just like seeped into the language of books in a way. But it reads like that so far, and I'll see what I still have to figure out what to do about that or with that. Especially since it's is still about pirates, and yeah, pirates. Obviously, pirate movies have had a huge impact on that. But like, say, Judge McDonald Fraser in The Pirates, being very over the top with this being basically a pirate movie written down, plays with the form, whereas this just like straight up takes a movie plot and the way it frames like scenes and so forth, just like takes the movie thing as read without like any sort of like subversion, criticism, or awareness of the fact that this is basically a movie language that is used. But that may just be me. I know it's a book that a lot of people kind of liked, and I would argue it certainly has sort of like the right, or it has good intentions. It's just like the execution is not necessarily where I would personally want it. But who am I, right? Like, at the end of the day, my personal views don't necessarily matter that much. I did, however, really, really enjoy like the end of Red Plenty. It's a really good book. The way it kind of works out is just like really well done, and the things it looks at and the things it's shows is it's melancholy. It's very incisive in a lot of ways, and now I'm not sure if I 100% sort of like would agree with the political narrative that is or historical narrative that it kind of builds the larger narrative of like you have Khrushchev and the age of trying to actually get stuff done, and then Brezhnev and bureaucracy just take over and burn the place to the ground by not wanting to ever change anything. I'm not sure if that's like 100% true or anything of the sorts, right? Like, but the way it is done is incredibly effective, and that mix of like having like the historical introduction and then having like 2 or 3 short stories and then moving on to the next part, which has once again like a basically nonfiction history introduction, and then has like 2 or 3 short stories that sort of illustrate what has been said before. It works really well, especially for like an episode of Soviet history that not necessarily is at the forefront of everyone's understanding of the Soviet Union. So pretty good in that regard. In that case, good night, my friend. I hope you sleep well. Something interesting, though, and I'm gonna investigate, but seems Francis Spufford also wrote an introduction to the new edition of John M. Ford's Growing Up Weightless, which is another sci-fi novel by John M. Ford that recently got like a re-release like last year or so, the same way that The Dragon Waiting and some others got. So that's nice. The fact that he did pick such a relatively unknown cult kind of book to get into, to write an introduction to, it's cool. Not that I have read a said John Ford book, because the only one I've ever read is The Dragon Waiting, which is pretty cool. But I might read, Growing Up Weightless, since it is currently free on Audible, and what have I? There's nothing to lose there, right? And it's relatively short, so there's that. Oh, that's neat. I didn't know that. But as I said, like since I haven't read the actual book, I'm like, oh well, like I'm gonna just check that one out anyway because it's free. And free books is free books is free books. It's pretty simple. All right. Shall we do the thing and actually try to be productive for a while? I think that's a good start to the day. Um, I certainly hope to get through emails, get through messages, organize stuff, and all of that. And then I'll be back at the top of the hour, and we'll talk a bit, and then I'll get into writing, hopefully. And I am back. Hello, how are you? How are you doing, Yelize? I hope I don't mispronounce that too much. That's an interesting question there. I think it really depends on what your goal is, right? Uh, I mean, I certainly think that if you want to read more stories, read more broadly, have like a broader, understanding or overview of what is going on in particular, then reading books in translation is probably the way to go. If that is, just easier and faster for you. If you want to, learn, get better at learning a different language, then that's a whole nother thing. Obviously, that also goes only for the languages that you know, right? It's like if you're talking about a book written in French, Spanish, or whatever, then getting the translation instead of the English translation is obviously the way to go. Um, with English books, I think it also really depends on what you get out of books or how you read books and what kind of books, right? Depending on how much when you read, how much you focus on, word choices, prose style, that kind of stuff. And there's books where that matters more than others, right? Like, so it difficult to say um, on what your goal is. I think like the main thing is that it should, it shouldn't feel like a chore reading a book. And if reading it in English becomes a chore and you really enjoy the story, then reading it in translation and possibly later on reading it in English again will probably be the best way to go around that. I don't know. That's roughly how I would think about this. So I don't know. I'd probably just mix it up a bit and go for whatever I can find and get in that regard. I know that I recently last year I had that thing right, with the translation thing where I probably the opposite there because I don't read stuff in German. I obviously don't read stuff in German translation if the original is in English. But when it came to Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, I could get the unabridged audiobook of the German translation, but not of the English translation because that one is supposedly it exists, and, and nobody knows where you can actually get it because it's not on the American Audible, it's not on the British Audible, it's not on the German Audible. It's a big mystery, and I really needed to wrestle with myself before I realized that like it's stupid. Why would the English translation be better than the German translation? There's no real reason for that to be the case because Umberto Eco spoke both English and German, and as we know from interviews and stuff he's wrote, he kept in close contact with his translators in both languages, so they're presumably both fairly good translations. Um, but it took me a moment to wrestle with that, and I think partly that is that for a lot of things, the idea that like an American or British like that an English language book is somehow superior to a book in your native language is kind of weird. Is kind of built in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, that is partly because the German fantasy market, for example, is not very good. There's a few excellent German language fantasy books and science fiction books out there, but they're very few and far between, and the rest is very derivative in a lot of ways, which has not exactly helped me with, appreciating stuff with a German title. But that's like a personal thing, something that we kind of need to be aware of, because why would something be written in English be superior to something written in German, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, French, Spanish, whatever, right? It doesn't have to be. It still remains. I mean, obviously, you have like a larger market potentially or larger group of people writing in English to begin with, but that's just like one small part of it. Yeah, that is of course like another difficult issue. In that case, yeah, go with the English translation. It's just like with an Umberto Eco novel, that is not the case. That was directly translated into German from the Italian original. With, as I said, Umberto Eco actually proofreading the German translation and stuff, because he was that kind of guy. Hey Apollo, how are you doing? But yeah, it's complicated in that regard, at least. Yeah. What else? I was yeah, did my usual admin stuff. I did even update my phone software. Wow. No, not exactly a big deal, but anyway. And then I fought very hard with my self discipline to not click on a video that YouTube is constantly recommending to me for last week. It's a 3-year-old video, and it's called is it called the extreme leftism or the political extremism on BookTube and the lack of conservative booktubers? And it's like 3 years old, and it has like 6,000 views. It's not a big deal, but for a week now, YouTube is constantly recommending that thing to me, and I'm like, I'm not gonna. This will only make me very angry indeed. Oh, I didn't know that about the Catcher in the Rye one, but that's that's funny. That's the same. Like, I think like the biggest thing there is that famous German translation of one of the early Discworld novels that had like a one-page ad for Muggy instant soup in the text in the middle in the German translation that was never authorized by by the publisher, much less by the original publisher, much less by Terry Pratchett or anyone. And it's one of those like sins that hasn't helped the cause of German translation fantasy in my view. I'm all right. I'm glad that you're feeling better again. I'm all right. I'm getting angry at people, but that's normal. And I have started The Adventures of Amin al-Sirafi, and I'm like 5 chapters, 6 chapters in now, so I'll probably get through a large part of it. And while I can't, fully judge how I will feel about the book afterwards, I can already see how it fits into my larger sort of series about pirate novels. So that's a nice thing to see how I can already frame it within that context. And, that always makes me feel good, I guess, if I can sort of like put context to stuff, or put stuff into like a larger context. So no, there weren't. As far as I'm aware, they were not common in German translations in general. Like, I mean, you usually had like at the back of the book, you used to have like a couple of pages, possibly with printed ads for other books by similar authors, the same publisher, whatever, right? But that's like at the back of the book. Usually, that specific Muggy Soup ad was in the middle of the text. It's a really weird thing. It was it basically it was a huge deal back in the 90s when it happened, and it's certainly been remembered as one of the biggest crimes against books in fantasy spaces, in the place where people did in fact read you know yeah, in places in where people read in fact Discworld. And it supposedly is one of the reasons why Terry Pratchett put that bit about advertisement in the Moving Pictures novel. Moving Pictures has this part about subliminal messages in movies, where what's his face, Dibbler is forcing them to put like these small bits and pieces into the movie, the moving pictures, to sell his stuff, and that was supposedly inspired by Pratchett being so pissed off about the message about soup in, I think it was Guards. I would have to look it up. It's a big deal. Ah, that's the Slavic inspired fantasy you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, right? The One Among Crows. Yeah, I'm gonna finish the Amina Al Sirafi one, and then I guess I will probably read Italo Calvino, If a Traveler, if on a winter's night, a traveler, because wanted to buddy read that with Kat, and their library hold apparently came in yesterday, so that sounds like the thing to do. Also, I mean, obviously it's a fairly short book, but probably not one that goes easy on the brain. Yeah, yeah. I think that's the whole like Oscar scene in Futurama when the Oscar for the best product placement goes to the soft drink robot and scene. But yeah, yeah. Yeah. So the Italo Calvino one. So I can feel smart about reading classics and reading serious literature before going back to rereading The Pirates by George MacDonald Fraser to make a video about that one. Weather and everything permitting and lighting permitting, because that one I once again have to get outside to do more pirate stuff, and I need to be figure out how to talk about it, because holy shit, does that book use language you don't want to use in this day and age. Probably already didn't want to use in the 1980s when Fraser used it. And it's one of those things I need to think about some more, because he's clearly criticizing the very very racist portrayal of both black people, but also Spanish people, and so forth in pirate movies. He's clearly criticizing the sexism and racism in those movies, but because the book is basically written as a pirate movie that it's parodying, satirizing, or so forth, it uses the same kind of language, and that's one of those things where I feel like the understanding of what is allowed in comedy or what is not has kind of shifted to, you don't do that unless your own voice is right. It's the whole like N-word kind of thing, right? And the book does not use the N-word as far as I remember, but it does use the C slur for black people. That's C slur, to be clear. And I'm like, whoa, that's something that will definitely stop a few readers when they encounter that one. But yeah, it's something I need to think about a bit more, how to phrase that, because it's a field where I myself am very uncertain about like how to do that properly. It's like, do you have to point that out? Do you have to use the terms to make it to point out what is going on, or is that something you just don't have the right to do unless you are part of the group that slur is used against? Right? That's just like one of those things where I'm personally sort of haven't fully fixed my brain upon, and I think yes, the the times have certainly shifted since 1983, and yeah, but beyond that, holy shit, is George MacDonald Fraser on the money in a lot of things with that book. All right, guys, shall we do the second sprint? And I will try to actually do some writing, being productive and all of that. I've heard about it. So yeah, see you in 45-ish. Hello, everybody. I am back. Hello, Kat. Yeah, that was very much timely, Kat. I'm sorry. Hello, Mattia. How are you doing? This is sadly the end of sprints today. I will be heading down to the gym now to punish myself, and maybe later I will also go and donate blood, which would have the advantage of, having a little money before the month is over, because right now that is incredibly limited, by which I mean I got like $5 left to buy food, which is not necessarily going to be a lot of food until the month is over. We'll see. So that's the plan for now. I don't know. I haven't read City of Thieves. I've heard good things about it. I guess it's more a question of like how much time you want to spend, because Redwall is fairly short and it has a rat with an eye patch. That's the things I know about it. Yeah, I mean, you can just like always pick a Redwall book from time to time. They are all sort of standalone. They're all set in the same world, but they're not directly sequels to each other. So you can always pick one and then go back to Redwall months later. For example, book 1 is Redwall. Book 2, Mossflower, is set in the far past of the novel Redwall, right? It features Martin the Warrior and the founding of Redwall Abbey. And then you go back forward in time to a book that is set a generation after, 2 generations after the events of Redwall, and it jumps around, so you can always pick one when you feel like it, I guess. I haven't read City of Thieves yet. I've heard good things about it, but that's all I know. Hey, Chantel. Now I'm even more sorry, Kat. I'm so sorry. That was not intended. So yeah, I did manage to get a few things sorted out, and once again managed to type like one sentence in the actual fiction text. I'm still taking too long to get into that, but I hope to be back on firmer ground like throughout this week when things slowly get more normal, hopefully. So I'll be running to catch a bus now. I hope you have a good start to your day, whatever you're planning to do now, or a good evening if you are, living in America, for example. I'm trying to record the video for Death of the Author by Nidio Corafor later today, so there will be a video up, and I will be back tomorrow morning for the next sprints. All things, staying the way I plan them to stay. Yeah. So thanks again for hanging out. I, as always, very much appreciate that. And yeah, hopefully see you